All righty, I think we'll begin. I think it is right at the top of the hour, so we're going to begin this webinar. Welcome, everybody. My name is Leanne Chuboff, and I'm the Vice President of Technical Affairs at SQF. We are happy to welcome you all here today, especially Paul Bradley with TraceGains. So this webinar is ingredient sourcing and supplier selection. What do you really need to know? And the objective is really to create actionable strategies for ingredient sourcing and supplier selection. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Before we begin, I just have a couple announcements real quick, and then I'll get into the antitrust and then introduce our speaker. But I wanted to start off by saying we hope to see you in New Orleans next year. SQF Unites is coming to New Orleans, March 11th through the 14th at the Hyatt Regency in New Orleans. So we're actively working on the agenda, and registration will be opening in September. So hopefully you can just mark your calendar right now, March 11th through the 14th, and wait for more information for registration and hotel information. So new place, new time. We hope to see you soon. Next slide. And as always, when we gather in a forum that brings competitors together in discussion, we want to make sure we stay in line with our antitrust. So SQF follows the FMI antitrust. I would like for you just to take a moment to review the antitrust statement in front of you. If you need a copy of this antitrust statement, please let us know. Just as a reminder, so you don't have to go through all the words on this page, but conversations regarding price fixing, boycotting, trade restriction, or other violations of antitrust law are to be avoided. If you feel that the conversation is in violation of the antitrust law, please speak up and we will do the same. Okay. So this webinar, like I said, is ingredient sourcing and supplier selection. There are going to be questions and answers at the end of this session, but feel free to chat in your questions as the conversation continues. So if you're anything like me, I'll forget what I was supposed to ask by the end of the webinar. So just chat it in and I'll grab it and we will ask Paul at the end. So just to get you practicing with your chatting, I want to ask you a couple questions just to get the lay of the land. So can you just share with me what food sector category you're representing? So the chat button's at the end. So I don't think I see all of them. I don't think I see the chats for whatever reason, Koo. I'm not quite sure. That's okay. Oh, the chat is disabled. I guess it's disabled for whatever reason. We'll work on that. I see that the chat is disabled. Oh, so here we go. Some of you found it. Okay, chat is on now. So type in, it's a good thing we practice. Yes. So pets, bakery. So we have a trainer. Excellent. Dairy, food packaging, bakery, meat, lots of bakery, granola, frozen ice cream, dietary supplements, excellent, probiotics, more pet food, chemicals for food, fresh foods. Wow, you guys are quick chatters, that's for sure. Ingredient manufacturing, seasoning and condiments, spaghetti, salsa, chocolates, a wide variety. I just literally soup to nuts here, Paul. Yes, dietary supplements, procurement, in chocolate, raw seasoning. And then while you got your fingers going, what is your role at your site? I know somebody put in that they're a trainer, but what is your role? Are you the practitioner? I see somebody's in procurement, the CEO, QA, purchasing, senior buyer, food safety manager, quality specialist, buyer, inbound logistics. I think we got something for everybody here. Strategic sourcing manager. This is a great breadth of participants bringing all kinds of different knowledge and questions. This is going to be an exciting webinar. Yes, QA, SQL practitioner, excellent. And the last question is, what would you consider your site? If you're from a site, are you a small, a medium, or a large manufacturer or site? Small, okay, small sites. Lots of small, mediums, a couple large, small, medium, large. All right. Again, the whole gamut. This is going to be a very exciting webinar. Exactly what you were looking for, right, Paul?
This is fantastic. The perfect cross-section.
Yes, absolutely. So please share your challenges, your chats, your ideas, your questions, because we're all here to help each other. Paul's going to just lead the discussion and give you something to think about and talk about, but we're all in this together. So chat in your questions, your challenges, and any ideas or opportunities you think there are. Okay, so next slide, and this will get us to our main event right here. So I am very, very pleased to introduce Paul Bradley, who is the Senior Director of Product Marketing at TraceGains. Paul is a long-term tech veteran, which typically we don't have these tech veterans on here, but it'll be a very interesting perspective from Paul. He has over 20 years in the technology industry, and his passion and focus for today is using technology to help businesses adapt to this complex supply chain that we're facing, from foreign suppliers to multi-ingredients, and even the regulatory landscape that we're facing right now. So it's exciting because Paul is going to bring a different perspective to ingredient sourcing and supplier selection, and is going to provide you with some ideas on how you can use data and technology to create solutions to better understand your supply chain. So with that, and you guys can just read his bio or look him up on LinkedIn. I'm sure he's readily accessible. And then Paul, you could just do a little bit of introduction on your own. And with that, I am going to look for your chats and your questions and challenges that you're facing, and we will regroup at the end. So Paul, I'm going to hand it off to you right now.
Awesome. Fantastic. Leanne, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for spending some time with us this morning. As Leanne said, my bio is actually a little bit of a lie. It's getting to be more like 30 years in technology, but I try to be young and hip. But what I'm going to be bringing to the table today is not the deep expertise that so many of you have when it really comes into food safety. I was joking with Leanne before the call that probably everyone on the call has more deep food safety domain expertise and microbiology than I do. But what I can offer, what I'm hoping to speak with everyone about today, is the bigger landscape of the way that information flows through our industry, the way that data flows through our industry, and some of the challenges and hopefully some ways of thinking about those challenges that have become really, really meaningful in our ongoing discussions with our customers at TraceGains. We work with, it's coming up on 500 different brands, manufacturers of different kinds throughout food and beverage, a certain amount of dietary supplements as well. So our DS guys, hopefully you're in the right place today also. And we work with everyone from, a good cross-section of the global top 100 all the way down to a lot of new innovators and startups in the space. And there are challenges that are common. Obviously, there are challenges that are very different across those. So what I'm hoping to offer today is some perspective on the landscape of the industry that we see emerging. I'm going to share with you some direct data from conversations that we've had and research that we do with our customer environment. There are some real pressures out there, I think, mounting on brands and on manufacturers to be able to look more and more deeply into their supply chain. I'd like to talk about those and what some of those are. And why that can become a, frankly, really expensive and time-consuming endeavor, and why, from our perspective, it's becoming more important than ever to be able to really knowledgeably and intelligently select the right partnerships to make those kinds of investments in, what that can mean, what it can mean to really have what I'm going to describe as a 360-degree view of suppliers and supplier performance. And I'm going to finish out by really digging into some thoughts around, again, information and data, and really around data collection in particular, something that has been part of my career from the jump. I'm going to share with you some perspective on maybe how to think about almost a philosophy of how to go about data collection and what some of those things can mean. So we're really going to steer pretty clear of system solutions discussions. I love those discussions. I'd love to have them with you. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the landscape and hopefully come down to really talking about information, data, and how we can arm ourselves to make some of the best decisions that we can. So at TraceGains, every year we do a couple of surveys into our customer community. It's an awesome thing that we do. We get a terrific response, great cross-section of organizations that join us in these conversations. And we collect a lot of information. We feel like it's so important to really understand what's happening in our customers' universe. I'd like to share as a starting point just two very specific data points with you this morning that I think are really meaningful to the conversation that I'm hoping we can all have today. And the first of those is we asked earlier this year, thinking in the context of ongoing change and, we all know some continued instability in the global food and beverage supply chain, dietary supplement supply chain. We asked our customers, which of the following strategic shifts, you can see them listed here, were they anticipating implementing in the next 24 months? And that top bar, which is about 70% of respondents cited increasing supplier diversity as still being an extremely important strategic priority for them as they look out over the next 2 years. You can see some of the other pieces that fall in there. We're looking at change to our product offerings. We're looking at certain items being eliminated. Certainly, we all know reformulation continues to be necessitated in a whole variety of areas. Reshoring the supplier base, though, shows up there pretty prominently. And of course, if we'd asked about supply chain optimization and just reformatting our global supply lines, I'm sure that bar would have come a little further across. So we see pressure to continually be engaging with and modifying the supply chain or supply networks, I might even say, that we leverage. On the other side of the equation, we asked about the rate of new product development. Are you in the next 12 months looking at additional product development, product innovation, and a pretty substantial 65%, almost 2/3, coming back and saying, yes, we are. And we followed up on this. I've had a lot of great conversations, and there are a lot of reasons for this, right? Some folks have had product innovation a little bit on the back burner over the last 2 or 3 years, and that's changing. Competitive pressures are happening. Consumer preferences continue to shift. We have folks in the UK that are facing reformulation challenges or product development challenges coming right out of Brexit. We've got different regulatory pressures coming in internationally. So lots of things pushing brands into the direction of NPD. And you can sort of, I think, visualize quality and food safety and regulatory teams kind of squeezed in between these two boxes. Because all of the things, of course, that we all need to be able to accomplish in those domains, they don't go away, even as we face these dual pressures of a changing supply chain and ongoing pressures for innovation and for development. On top of all that, as I mentioned, we see a confluence of additional pressures coming together, asking brands and asking manufacturers to better and better understand and to know more and have more detail about their upstream supply chains. We have a variety of things going on here, from the blocking and tackling of regulatory requirements around traceability to big news items happening that can be really negative around negative labor practices or child labor. Those can create consumer concern. We have the whole domain of ESG. I mentioned shifting global regulatory pressures, and those of us, TraceGains is one, who operate in multiple international markets. We have to be very conscious of that. Ethical sourcing concerns coming in and driving a lot of pressure, on and on and on, right? This is a very, very partial list, but lots of things pushing brands to be able to say, yes, I really do understand my supply networks. I really do understand what my suppliers are up to. I've got view all the way back to that point of cultivation in some cases for what's really happening. But this is a big, big undertaking. I was at a sustainability conference in London earlier this year. I won't name any brands, but I had the opportunity to be in a panel and have some great conversations with a couple of organizations that work in the chocolate space. And I know we've got some folks on the call today who are in that arena. So no news to you guys about the global cocoa supply chain, right? I may not have this exactly right, but if I recall correctly, massive majority, right? Something like 90% of cocoa is produced on family small holdings, small agricultural operations, much of that in Central and East Africa. And folks from these brands were talking about the extraordinary work that they're doing with actual boots on the ground and resources in these communities to do things like not just understand the labor environment and what's happening there, but to look at things like the overall food security picture for these communities, to look at things like crop diversification and irrigation infrastructure, partly because it's the right thing to do. And I absolutely 100% believe that that's the primary motivator for the folks that I know in that space. But also, let's be honest, it's a bad look, right, if we're sourcing material from communities that are food insecure. So you see the effort and the level of effort that is going into really being able to say the right things and know the right things about our supply chain. But that's a big, big investment. These are some large organizations. They have those resources. But that's a lot of pressure, of course, across the industry to really say, where am I going to make that level of investment? Where am I going to put that level of resource if I have to, or at least the level of resource that's appropriate to where I'm operating? So the punchline for this whole section, to my mind, and I think what we're really hearing clearly in our customer community, is that there's pressure to understand the supply chain. That supply chain is changing. Our product lines are changing. And as we do that, being able to really understand the right customers to make those investments, or excuse me, the right partners, supplier partners to make those investments in, is really, really more important than ever. This is the Captain Obvious slide, right? And I'm sorry, I know the iceberg is the most tired analogy ever, but it's tired because it works for some situations, right? I mean, the risk in one way or another that we're kind of talking about here is it's very possible, and most of us, I'm sure, have had this experience in some respect or another. I can have a supplier relationship where pricing fits my cost model and they've got the stuff that I need and they're meeting me where I need to be on order quantity and stuff's showing up on time. The financials are looking pretty good. But down below the surface, there may be other things happening that are just not as easy for me to see. There may be a very opaque upstream supply chain with something buried in there that I would prefer to know about. Trucks are showing up with rat poop in them. When I do a corrective action, it's a real pain. Maybe other aspects of what's showing up on the dock are inconsistent, even if timing is not, on and on. You guys know the various things that could come in here probably better than I do. But why does this scenario exist, right? Again, it's a little bit of the Captain Obvious slide, but I do want to pull on this thread for a moment. Why is it that we can have these scenarios so easily where part of our picture may look great, but a less visible part of our picture may not look so great? And as I'm considering the partners that I really want to deeply invest in and be involved in, right, this is a hazard that I need to be extremely concerned about. And what we see very, very clearly in our customer community, and I think this is going to be self-explanatory to most folks in this conversation, is this is a classic problem of fragmented information, fragmented data. Because the information to evaluate supplier performance across each of those domains that we've just mentioned and many others certainly exists out there. That information's there in some sense. But there's a little bit of a maze throughout the organization to be able to track all that information down and connect it meaningfully. In a large organization, this is going to be true because it's a large organization, multiple facilities, multiple sites as part of the operation, many different things happening, different functional silos. But I would venture that for smaller organizations, there's a parallel set of challenges where I may have a more complex set of third-party relationships. I may be outsourcing more parts of my manufacturing value chain. I may have more partners engaged in different aspects of my business that just introduce the same set of challenges through a slightly different lens. So, the classic examples that I'm sure are elementary for all of you guys. I've got information that is originating at a loading dock where I've got folks who are very diligent and very focused on making sure that I've got good, complete, undamaged material showing up, or that my transportation compliance is where it needs to be, and that I'm dealing with the rat poop in the truck and I'm not finding it, and seals, temperatures, all of those great things that you guys are aware of. That information, though, in a lot of environments is not going to seamlessly mesh with regulatory compliance information or with FSQA information that may be out there, with purchasing and financial information that's going to be out there, with a data trail on past corrective actions and other things that may be happening. So this fragmentation of information, all of which is very important to a holistic view of what's happening in that supplier relationship, I think is fairly pervasive. And this is really only talking about the information that at least theoretically originates within the four walls of the organization, right? There's a whole other dimension when we start to think about things like oh, I don't know, I've got a supplier, our relationship is great, they send me good stuff, everything works the way I expect it to. But am I aware that that supplier has had really significant recall issues with a separate line of material impacting other folks in the industry? I might still want to know that. That might be a piece of data that's important to me, but I'm not going to capture that information within the domain of my own organization. All of this stuff kind of comes into play. So how do we think about that? Well, I mentioned this notion of a 360-degree view. What does it mean to actually assemble that? And I could have used a lot of different examples on the slide. It already has too many words on it. But if we look at the two orbs, if you will, in the center there and their overlap, yeah, I think what we're really trying to get at is how do we get to a merging and a synthesis of the information that shows up internal to my organization and information that can show up external to my organization? And how can I get that together into a framework where I can actually apply that to decision making? So on that internal side, obviously, we've got all the information that we're producing as we interact with our supplier partners. We've got quality information, we've got regulatory compliance information. Obviously, we're doing all the work that all of you do to ensure safety. We've got inspection data. We've got all of that stuff that's originating that we're tracking and that we're keeping our arms around. And then on the external side, we've got information that supplier partner is providing to us: documentation, certifications, certificates of analysis, on, and all that kind of information. As we go further afield of that, though, there's additional supplier data upstream from my tier 1 supplier that I probably also have some questions about, right? How are they handling sourcing? What are the tier 2 through tier 3 to tier N suppliers in their overall supply chain up to? What's going on in their world? You know, all of that traceability and transparency data that flows upstream from my direct partner, that's one set of information I need to be concerned about. And then there is increasingly, and it's growing like crazy all the time, a whole big wide world out there of additional third-party data that could be very, very useful to me. There's external audit data. There is a big, as many of you know, I'm sure, a large and growing ecosystem of ESG data and ESG audit providers who are out there aggregating that information. Our classic horizon scanning and risk and recall data, regulatory information from a field, et cetera. So all of that taken together, what we want is that merging at the center where we can bring all of that stuff together into that holistic 360-degree view, which opens up the whole discussion on the right-hand panel there around all those different elements of aggregation that we can start to think about there in terms of document data management, in terms of actual performance scorecarding, things that we can be doing there. Can we be instrumenting processes through which all this information is flowing? How am I thinking about cross-facility information? How am I thinking about comparative information between partners and partners, facilities and facilities? How do I think about standardization and metrics? Lots and lots of stuff that this opens up. But it's a framework for starting to kind of think about what it means to really get to that more holistic view that, again, I'm concerned about having, I want to have, so that I can really make the most informed decisions possible about investments into that partner community that I'm dealing with. So how do we make all that better? How do we attack it? Well, you know, again, tech guy here, so some obvious bias, but you know, we tend to think about this in terms of a number. And I could portray this in a number of different ways, but in my small brain, you know, a few different really important frameworks or pillars of all of this that we can start to contemplate. And I'm sure that all of you have portions of this. Some of you may have all of this, but you know, do I have a conscious framework for how I'm going to attack supplier selection? Do I know what I value? Do I know how I evaluate that? Do I know how I'm going to measure and instrument and compare? And then once those decisions are made, do I have the performance framework that correlates to that? Do I have a holistic scorecarding approach to be able to reasonably objectively evaluate my partners one against another, the progression of my partnerships over time, et cetera? But things that can be a little bit easier to miss, I think, in this domain are, do I then have a cross-team communication strategy? Have I thought through the way that information, all that potentially very disparate information, needs to come together and flow across the different organizations, the different stakeholder teams in my organization or within other partnerships that I may have? I'm thinking of co-mans, co-packers, right? Other folks in my value chain that I may need to be able to share that information with. And then lastly, do I have a fairly comprehensive, have I really thought through that measurement strategy and the data collection strategy that lies behind that? And I'm going to drill into that last one, because if you ask me to pick one as a tech guy, obviously I'm going to go to that one. One of the things that I think is most important here and so easy to miss is the thought process of really systemically working through how it is that I want to go about data collection, how it is that I really want to frame and prioritize the data that I'm going to go after. We live, I think most of us, in a world where in a lot of cases we have more data than we need, but not often the data that we need for specific decisions that are most meaningful to the business. We can be saturated with data across a whole set of domains and still starve for data that really informs some of our most important decision points. And it's really, really easy to go and spend a lot of money on getting more data and more graphs and more instrumentation and cool reports that aren't necessarily moving the needle for me as a business and really helping me do what I need to do. So, again, there are different frameworks for tackling this. This isn't the one and only right one, but I kind of think of this as I call the 7 deadly questions of data collection. But I think this is it. You may find this an interesting framework for thinking through, and it's a sequence on purpose, because it really begins at the top with the question of, hey, do we know the decisions that we're trying to make? Right? Have we cataloged out? Are we clear on the business decisions that we need data to inform? What are we trying to answer? There are probably some decisions that I can make independent of data, and there are probably some decisions that are extremely data dependent. Am I clear on that? If I asked 5 people in the organization what those key business decisions are that we're trying to inform with a data collection strategy, would they all say the same thing? Or would they give me 5 different takes, right? See, it really begins at that fundamental, inward looking, do I know what I'm trying to get after here? And when I do, and all 5 people are aligned, or however many people, can I clearly define the data that we need in order to drive those decisions? What are the specific data points that are going to be required to do that? And there's a trap here, right? This is a pitfall, which is that I can have data that is critical, just right smack in the critical path for decision making. And I can have data that's really interesting, but it's just informative, right? It's nice to know, but it's not something that's crucial to what I actually need to understand. Am I clear on that distinction as I'm working through my data collection strategy? With that nailed down, obviously the next big question is, do we know how I'm going to collect it? Where is it? Do I know where it comes from? How can I get it? But importantly, is it one source? Is it many sources? When I have that data, is there additional work? Are there additional cycles required to aggregate those sources and pull that data together in a way that's going to be useful? And when I get past that point, the next logical question is, okay, then can I standardize it and can I normalize it so it's meaningful for comparison? What do I mean by that? Well, is all the data in common units, right? Is there some sort of data hierarchy? Am I confusing SKU level data with item or material level data, with facility level data, with organization level data? Am I clear on all of those things? Do I have different taxonomies and different systems that I'm going to need to spend additional cycles to interact with in order to get to real true apples to apples comparisons? And if I've wrestled through all of that, this 5th one, can I meaningfully interpret the results? What does right look like? Do I know what is good? What is bad? What is acceptable? Are there thresholds that govern what's an acceptable versus an unacceptable metric? Do I understand the interpretation of that information that I've worked so hard to be able to collect? And if I do, I should be closing in now on being able to really say, okay, for number 6, can I drive actionable decisions, right? Do I know now which of those data points are going to be most important back to that decision-making process that started up at number 1? And if I've done all of that, again, another one that's easy to skip past, I think is so important is, once I've gotten all that data and I've made a data-driven decision, am I clear on the metrics that I intended for that decision to impact? Do I know what I'm going to measure to evaluate the success or failure of the choice that I just made? And if I can dial all this in, and it can take some work to do, but if I can dial all this in, I can create a really virtuous circle, right? Where as I am moving through this process, I'm continually producing a clear set of instrumented metrics that can inform continuous improvement through this process. So again, one way out of many to think about this, but I'm a big advocate for thinking in a very deliberate way about not just data, because there's tons of data, but data in the context of decision-making, data in the context of the key business priorities and decisions that we need that data in order to be able to drive. So I'm going to probably wind up my portion of the presentation there. I will just say, TraceGains Gather is a terrific way of interacting with our network and with our ecosystem. It's the world's most powerful networked ingredients marketplace, we like to call it. And it's a great way to understand how we think about data and how we think about taxonomy and how we think about some of the information that is very, very important in our customer community and from our perspective in the industry. So come check it out. By the way, it's a great way to join the conversation with us. I welcome the conversation personally. Of course, as Leanne said, I'm pretty easy to find most of the time. But Leanne, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over there, or hand over there, and let's get into some Q&A and some discussion.
Excellent. Okay, there's a couple questions that came in, and I have some of my own. Hold on, let me get to my notes. Okay, so there was a question in the chat regarding commands. So the question is, as a brand owner, our main co-man uses a very diverse list of suppliers. They strive to use like for like ingredients whenever possible, since they have other customers. How can I stay a step ahead of them when they need to make last minute supplier changes due to supply chain issues while protecting our product?
Oh, this is a big one. Yeah, this is an area that we have spent a lot of time and attention on over the last couple of years. It's interesting. I mentioned that customer survey data, and about a year ago, a little more than half of our customers reported that they had some form of co-man relationship. We asked that question again last year, and it was 75%. So we're seeing, a big lean into this space. And this question nails it, right? I mean, these co-man relationships lend themselves to really complicated sourcing relationships. I may have my co-mans doing all the sourcing. I may be doing some of it for them. I may have, any sort of admixture of all of that can be going on. I think that the best thing that I can probably say in response to that question is, I'll actually tie it back to that data collection piece, right? What is the information that I really need those co-mans to be providing for me so that I can have the confidence that I need regarding the materials that are coming through that supply chain? And am I in very, very crisp and very, very clear alignment with my co-man partners on what that information needs to look like and when and under what circumstances it needs to move across to me? I think it is imperative for brands to be able to very clearly look and say, look, if I need to understand that full supply chain all the way back soup to nuts, my partnerships need to reflect that, my co-man agreements and my discussions with them and the documentation flow that's moving through those is going to need to reflect that. And that can be pretty complex to manage. We do play in that space. We offer some stuff to help make that a little bit easier, but we tackle that precisely because the complexity there can quickly get overwhelming. And I would advocate a very intentional, start with that perspective in mind as you're building those relationships, build that into those relationships so that's part of the relationship there, that information needs to flow smoothly and it needs to flow in a timely manner.
Because that was my question regarding the survey and increase of contract manufacturing. Is that an increase from last year, those concerns? So that is an increase, you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. We're certainly seeing, and I mean, the questions that we've asked very intentionally are, hey, are you working in this space? Are you engaging? We have more and more people saying, yes, we are. We didn't used to be, or we worked with a couple of co-mans. Now we're working with a whole lot of co-mans.
Yeah, we get a lot of those questions fielded into us regarding co-mans. So that's why I was like, oh, it's nice to be validated with data right there. So, and then also on that survey, when you say increase in supplier diversity, can you expand on that? Is that due to foreign suppliers? Is that due to multi-ingredients? Can you just explain what you mean by supplier diversity there?
Yeah, I mean, and this is the conversational overlay that we always have with customers, right? To fill in the gaps there. But the very strong sense that I've gotten is that the primary thing there is about building a more resilient supply chain, right? Everybody in one sense or another felt the pain, between 2020 and 2022. And, as we all know, we continue to see disruptive events out there. There's no nice old fashioned linear supply chain new normal that we're resolving towards. So I think the number one factor is people wanting to simply have a more diverse supplier network, more redundancy built into their supplier networks, to be able to address material issues. But I think the second piece is, it ties into the other data point that I shared, which is that, I'm just not necessarily sourcing the same 12 ingredients from the same 6 guys in the way that I used to. I need to be more nimble on the product innovation front, meaning I need more options for net new ingredients that I may never have handled before, or for reformulation, with similar substitutes based on all kinds of random things that could be hitting me, consumer, regulatory, tons of Brexit stories I could tell on that front, right? Due to changing agricultural regulations.
Yeah, I think the big concern in substituting those ingredients sometimes is suppliers use allergen-based materials. And so from a food safety perspective, it's trying to keep up on all of that. Is that kind of what this whole system, the questions that you ask, and is because I noticed when we were talking about the 360 view, I didn't see specifications were listed in there. Where does specifications play a role in that 360 view? Is that like the starting point, or is that you didn't mention it because it's so obvious kind of a thing?
It's kind of the latter. Yeah, no, I mean, specifications are crucial to all of this, right? And obviously that's in that sort of overlapping diagram. That's that critical point of interface there. In that, yeah, my material specifications right up to my finished goods specifications, I need to be very clear on what those are, where they live, who needs to understand them. Right. I did mention, I think, something as nuts and bolts as a certificate of analysis for inbound material, the ability to then make sure that matches up to my specifications that I have. All of that just sort of, data level grunt work is really important at being able to understand that dimension of performance, because if those things aren't matching, right, if my specifications and tolerances routinely aren't being met, that's a factor in that relationship that's really, really important for me to be able to evaluate.
Yeah. So a question in the chat from Amanda: do you have suggestions on how to overcome global supply chain issues and shortages? Well, if you do, I think you could write a book. Wait, hold on. Part 2. An example of one I was struggling with was the sourcing of sunflower lecithin. Do you have any?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, if I had the answer to this one, Leanne, I would be retired.
I know, right? Mm-hmm.
No, but it is a multifaceted challenge, right? Sunflower lecithin, sunflowers, obviously Ukraine. We all know this. We all know the story, right? So it becomes a dimension of first, can I find an alternate supplier? Can I qualify that supplier and their materials quickly and efficiently? Can I understand if my claims are intact if I use that material, as we just kind of talked through, right? But you've got the fallback aspect to that of, when you get to something like sunflower products, sometimes the answer is no. They're not out there, right? They're not around. So, working with my innovation team, what's my next valid substitute that has an acceptable, reformulation impact if I have to go in that direction? And this is what I was mentioning before about being pulled into that domain of maybe some really unfamiliar stuff, right? And this is where my expertise runs right into a wall. I don't know what the good substitutes are for sunflower lecithin, if there are any. But it gets into that dimension where I am probably going to have to go out there and explore, and I'm probably going to have to go out there and look for that information, look for that data, and try and be as efficient at that as I can. That's why, not to make turn it into a TraceGains plug, but that's why we built our marketplace, right? Because one of the challenges that we realize has been out there forever is Google is a pretty inefficient tool for going out and doing that level of research. And what I need to be able to do is go out and say, I'm looking for this, and I need a really substantial set of filtering tools to be able to get down to the technical specification level of what I really need to try and do. And if the answer is that I can't use that, I need to have that same level of specificity to go out and start figuring out, well, what am I going to do? And if this becomes an R&D challenge, we've got a whole additional level of technical research we need to be able to do quickly.
Well, Gladys chatted in that Soya International for sunflower lecithin might be an option. So Amanda, you might want to check that out or reach out to Gladys.
Thank you, Gladys.
Yes, thank you,
Gladys. Gladys bailed me out.
A question from Julie: how can I ensure that suppliers are aware of regulatory changes in an export market? new food standards for an ingredient, new allergen regulations, etc., should I be responsible for communicating these to my co-man or supplier?
There's kind of the world of what should be and what is. We'd all love to live in a perfect world where all of our partners were completely on top of that information and we could have trust in their ability to do that. And certainly, I think we all value that very highly in a partner, right? When we have a partner who can give us a lot of confidence that, yes, they are very aware of the regulatory environments that they're working in and they're monitoring changes there. Same with our co-mans. But in the world that we actually live in, I think there is a lot to be said for having a good command of that information in-house. And if you have a regulatory team, arming them with the tools and with the information that they need to be able to keep track of some of those critical vectors in the regulatory environment that you do need to be aware of. In the 360-degree diagram, that's that little box off in the lower left, right, of all that external data that exists out there. And, again, you really need to be, I think, somewhat intentional about, in that data collection strategy. Where am I going to get that data? What do I need to know for those pieces? What do I need to know to have an acceptable level of risk management? And how can I build a strategy around doing that? Again, regulatory coverage is something that we try to address for that reason. You can certainly go and it's all, generally speaking, it's publicly available information. You can find it. It can take some legwork. And, we have third-party partners and there are entities out there that can make that job a lot easier.
And I would also say from my perspective, like at SQF, the site needs to be aware of any regulatory changes, how to obtain those regulatory changes from the market they're producing in as the market that they're exporting to. So it's not that the auditor needs to be aware of those regulatory changes, but the site needs to know. And that's what the auditor is figuring out, is how does the site know what those regulatory changes are so that they could adhere to them. And so you might want to go back to your supplier and ask them that same question. Might want to go back to them just so that that they have the competencies and the resources in place to adjust to any changing marketplace. So the new sesame allergen that is now part of the USDA or the FDA reg, how are your foreign suppliers ensuring that sesame reg is being properly labeled, et cetera? So that would be what you want to do down your supply chain to ensure that they understand how to change with the change in the regs. So it's about having those competencies and those resources at your suppliers. It's just such an integral part to the success of food safety, starting with the ingredient. I know it sounds obvious, just like Paul says, it just sounds so obvious, but it's really understanding what those suppliers. So then I just have a question, and there's another question in the chat, but is this approach connecting suppliers to suppliers along the supply chain, or is it just connecting all the suppliers to the site? Because the errors that I see is the suppliers going into the suppliers that goes into the site. So does this connect the suppliers, the supply chain, or just the suppliers to the one back kind of a thing?
I think increasingly the ask that is out there, whether it's from the regulatory side or from the consumer side, is that complete chain, right? Being able to really understand suppliers to suppliers to suppliers. Again, what I've been part of a lot of conversations recently that are more on the ESG, sustainability, ethical sourcing side, right? And obviously, that's an incomplete picture if I don't have a pretty firm view of what's going on. Again, all the way, I use some examples about, the actual agricultural, the cultivation environment that's going on there. Having said that, there's nothing easy about doing that. We don't live in a world today where there is the master turnkey, just go throw some software dollars at it and all of that's going to just blossom and come together. But that's kind of the point that I was trying to make from the get-go there, Leanne, which is that to really do that and in today's world involves a fair amount of work. It involves building the right partnerships. It involves having very firm expectations and clear expectations of partners.
Yeah.
Which is where I do always bring it back to that primary, that tier one supplier is, I really hope that's the right guy to make that investment in, or that's the right group to make that investment, because we're going to be doing a lot of work shoulder to shoulder probably to really build out the picture that we ultimately want to have.
Yeah. So there's a question from Dakota in the chat. What are some examples of KPIs or metrics that a food CPG manufacturer can implement in regards to the data collection analytics process described through the measurement strategy topic? As a supply chain manager, decisions making and balancing different stakeholder needs in the operation has been difficult without organized data. Any advice there?
Yeah, so I want to make sure I understand the question. So it sounds like we're asking about KPIs surrounding the data collection process itself. In other words, how do I understand if my data collection process is successful?
So KPIs are metrics that a food manufacturer can implement in regards to the data. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic question. I love that question. I don't think there's a one right answer structure to that, but I would bring it back to that aspect of, what are those key business decisions that I'm trying to enable within the organization? And some are fairly predictable, right? I want to be able to say, I have a sourcing decision that I want to make. I have several suppliers I could work with. Which of those do I steer that sourcing decision to, or do I need somebody new? All the various cost dimensions and things that I need to manage on that level. It really comes back to, do I have that understanding of that business decision framework that I need to be able to accomplish? And then can I measure my ability to provide the data that maps to each of those points? And it can involve a lot of different aspects, but, we could think about things like, for a given supplier, how are they in terms of their overall documentation and data compliance with me? Do I have everything I need from them? Is it all current? Does that happen in a fairly quick manner? Do I have outstanding requests that age for long periods of time? Are there issues in being able to get information from them? Are they responsive, right? I could have a dimension of things there. And then I could turn around and say, okay, how are they doing on a material performance basis? Right. Again, some of the things I mentioned earlier. Do I have material showing up at my facilities when I expect it to? Do I have frequent corrective actions or rejection issues with that material? Do I have material performance metrics coming back from the plant floor that I could bring into that? Right. I could then look and say, do I have site audit data that I'm generating by going out and interacting with these folks? How is that? So you can kind of start to build this view. And that's where I mentioned that notion of a supplier scorecard, right? That can really be a reflection of, is my data collection strategy meeting my needs? Because if I'm able to go and get that good, clear business decision framework that says, this guy's awesome, I want to really double down with them. This person's fairly challenging. I may want to go back and challenge them, or I may reevaluate that relationship. If I've got that kind of structured data coming through, it's a good proxy for telling me that my collection strategy is probably functioning pretty well.
Yeah. So does the system help to monitor the data? Like, are there annual updates that are alerted when documentation is missing, or recommendations for a different KPI? Does the system does TraceGains provide? Because it's just a lot of it. In the end, it's very good information. It's just kind of overwhelming. So it's like, where do you start, and how does the system assist, especially from an annual review, if you really want to do that annual review using that data?
Yeah, so speaking for TraceGains specifically, yes, that's a big part of what we do, is because you're right, it's more data than a human can keep in their head, right? Mm-hmm. If it wasn't, we wouldn't need software solutions to do it. So yeah, it gets mind-boggling, right? It gets above a critical mass of what any one person or any one team can easily manage. So a big part of what our solution does is it allows you to collect and digitize all that information. Really importantly, this is so geeky, I'm sorry, Hank, but really importantly, it standardizes that information. It puts it into a standard taxonomy so that I can compare, right? I mentioned cross comparison and standardization. That's a big part of what we do. And then what comes out the back of that are a whole variety of dashboards, reports, aggregations of metrics, and we do absolutely assemble a supplier scorecard, which you can configure, of course, because no two businesses need to know exactly the same things. But to be able to take some of those dimensions that I just mentioned and say, Yeah. Am I complete and current on documentation? Cool. That's all looking good. Is my material performance good? Okay, that's looking good. I've got audit and quality information. Okay, that's looking good. Right. Being able to put those things together in a way that makes sense to you, so that when you do need to get to that annual review process, it's not a journey through the wilderness to go out and manually assemble all that information each time. It's a living, ongoing record that you can produce when that decision needs to be made.
So how do you think, so some people, just as a side note, I have a couple more questions for you, and I think we'll be out of time. And just in the end, I want to ask you if there's 2 or 3 things you want everybody on this webinar to take away, what would that be? So just that's going to be your closing thought. That's my closing question. That's something you can think about between now and the close of our conversation here. So just need 2 or 3 takeaways that you want anybody to remember. So there's some chats in here of people having troubles with procuring specific irradiated cornstarch, dextrose in there. And Joseph Park said ingredients online for all ingredients, but if anybody else has any other ideas as to how to procure ingredients, feel free to chat it in there. If Paul, if you have ideas, you could share that right now, because like you said, I think we could all write a book if somebody could get all these ingredients. But if you have any ideas.
Yeah, well, for sure, come to TraceGains, come to gather.tracegains.com, or just come to our main website and navigate over to TraceGains Marketplace. It is an ingredients marketplace, and I think you'll find first of all, a ton of great information. We work with over 62,000 supplier locations worldwide right now, have materials there. But what you'll also find is that we give you a lot of tools that other search utilities may not, and Google certainly won't, for being able to filter to your specific needs. So if you have allergen needs, if you have very specific formulation needs or material characteristics, we make it a lot easier to go in and enter those criteria. Come check it out. It's free. It doesn't cost you a thing to try it out, and see what we can do for you on that front. We're pretty proud of it on our side.
Excellent. That's great advice. Thank you. I didn't even know that. I wasn't trying even to put a plug in for TraceGains. So that's amazing.
It was perfect. I'll take it.
For sure. Okay. So my question is regarding the new traceability reg. I'm sure you've heard about it. Sure. The FSMA 204 that has just been posted. So any advice or how to connect, because again, it's about connecting the supply chain regarding lot code information. So any advice or thoughts regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been having that conversation for quite a while, and candidly, that's not what our solution necessarily tries to do from a complete standpoint. But I think that the number one piece of advice that our regulatory guru has been sharing with me and everyone that we talk to is it begins with fully understanding your responsibilities under the regulation. And for so many folks out there, I think that's still very confusing. What is it that I, as an organization, really am accountable for under 204? And how do I best prepare for that? So I think number one is, make sure that you are clear based on your supply chain and what you have coming through, what you need to be aware of there. And number two, this is going to require a lot of conversation with your partners. You may very well find that in your transportation network, a lot of the components of what you need there may be there. You may find other partners that you work with can help stitch that picture together. But I think it's, for me, the thing that I've internalized most about it is no one organization is going to solve this all by themselves. This, again, is not, I'd love to say, here, come give us a bunch of money, we'll throw some software at you and it'll fix it. It's not going to work that way. This is really asking the industry to come together in partnership, and we all need to get better at that than we have been in the past.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I've been finding out. It's going to take some good conversations and working together in order to make this successful. And it's a great opportunity to get closer with your suppliers and ensure your suppliers are close to their suppliers and so on and so forth, so we can build that supply chain. Alrighty, so I think we're about ready to wrap up. We got 6 more minutes. If anybody else has a question, please chat it in. The recording of the webinar will be available. So we will be posting the webinar. So that will be available. And again, feel free to seek out Paul. He's always available for questions. As you can tell, he's a very friendly and knowledgeable individual. So with that, Paul, let's just wrap things up. And what are these 2-3 key takeaways? So a lot of information shared, a lot of good discussion regarding the supply chain and building partners within that supply chain. So what are some of those key takeaways that you would want to share with everybody?
Yeah, definitely. Leon, I mentioned I've been in technology for a long time. My first job in tech, and I'm not going to tell you how long ago this was, but it was changing those big magnetic tapes that we used to record database backups on and putting them in boxes and shipping them to a warehouse. Back when data was really expensive and physically heavy to manage. But I share that only because we've always had more data than we knew what to do with. And nowadays more than ever, we're in a lot of ways, like I mentioned, I think we're all drowning in information. And it's so easy to get kind of seduced by the lure of more and more information, more and more data. The big takeaway for me that I would offer to everybody, a great old mentor of mine used to always say over and over, start with the end in mind. If we're going to think about data collection, information, software solutions, what the heck are we trying to achieve, right? If those are the answer, what was the question? I think it's just so important to really tie back to what are the decisions we're trying to make as a business? What's really going to inform our path forward? Then and only then, let's start thinking about how to get the information together that we really need. Don't let the vendor show you the really cool looking graph that's not actually going to inform any decision that you have to make this year. Let really figure out where we're trying to go, what we need to know to get there, and then let's work together and we can figure out what information really flows gracefully into that and makes that happen. But work backwards from that goal, and I think you'll be in a much better place than just trying to work forward through the massive information that's bouncing around out there.
That is great advice. And actually, I never even thought of it that way, because I always say we're really good at creating solutions without identifying that problem. So we're always assuming, and it just goes back to what is the problem you're trying to solve? And then you can build in your solution. So in your supply chain, if you're having challenges here and challenges there, and identifying those challenges and then creating those solutions. So I think that's just great advice. Yes, it's a great way to conclude this webinar. So Paul, I want to thank you for your insights and your perspective. It was a very, very interesting perspective, and it's all about food safety, but it's really gathering that information to see how we could better our supply chain. And many thanks to TraceGains and for their sponsorship for this webinar and for sharing all this information and lending you to us for this hour. So I appreciate it. Paul is, like I said, available on LinkedIn. You could reach out to TraceGains. I believe Melissa put the link to the Gather website in the chat. So feel free to do that and reach out to TraceGains with any of your questions. So thank you all very much. Look for the webinar. Koo said it will be posted next week and will be available on the SQFI resource page. So feel free to check it out. All righty. Thank you all very much. Thanks again, Paul.
All right. Thanks so much. It was super fun.
Yeah. Have a great day. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.